Okay. Good day. Today we're having famous Eddie Torres with us, and we're going to have a small interview, a few questions, and hopefully everything will go okay. So, welcome, Eddie.
Thank you, Rene. Pleasure to be here. And I know it's one of these situations where you look for the moment to have time to interview and to spend time with people who are interested in knowing more about the history. So although right now I'm getting ready to eat, but I asked Rene during this time for us to have this interview. So it's my pleasure.
Thank you very much. So we have some, basic questions for the beginners. Let's say, what do you think about the three main tips for a growing dancer, just in general?
Well, I would say in step number one to study and to become a good dancer, I think first it requires the abilities that we know that we need to learn how to dance. For example, in dancing, dancing is a musical art, and you should have a sense in your ear and understanding of what timing is about. Because I always tell students that if you can't understand timing, music timing, while you're dancing, it's going to be very difficult to be an accomplished dancer. Because I would say that's probably the first and foremost important thing. To find yourself a good teacher, to be able to explain to you the fundamentals, and someone who can also help you understand how to work with the music. Yeah? Once you have that, then it's a question of finding a good teacher, and of course taking class consistently, be dedicated to your study and practice. And I always tell students, because we always say that practice makes perfect, and I tell students that I don't agree with that. I always tell the students that correct practice makes perfect, because you must practice correctly. Okay, so those are a few tips, but I would say it starts with that. The student should have an ability and an understanding of timing with the ear. Some people, unfortunately, I've had students who have no understanding and they have what we call a dead ear. If you can't get a student to understand how to work with timing, it's going to be quite difficult for them to develop as dancers.
Okay, so thank you. Um, okay, and what do you think is important in general for a beginner improver to maybe get better, to feel more comfortable about himself, female or male?
Well, it comes back to first taking your classes with a good teacher, and then I would have to say that dancing socially to give you it's like the road work of dancing. You take your classes, then you should get out in the social scene and practice your dance socially, because that's where the real dancing takes place. It's almost like taking driving lessons at a driving school and then getting on the road and driving.
Practicing and
So
mingling.
learn your technique, learn your bases, and then go out to socials and practice your dance.
Okay, that's very nice to hear from you. And of course, it's a general question again, but being you in the salsa community and in salsa culture for a quite long time, it's interesting to know what do you love most about salsa, or a few pointers. What do you love about salsa?
Well, I come from not this generation. I'm from, let's say,
Yeah, the
the
beginners.
last generation. We have now, since I started dancing, which is 50 years ago, we have three generations to talk about. We have the original generation, which is known in New York as the Palladium generation. The people who started dancing in the late 40s, early 50s. The second generation, which I belong to, we started dancing more in the 60s. See? Um, and now today's generation, which is amazing. Um, I would say that in the time that I was dancing in my youth, we didn't have any teachers. No one knew how to teach with any kind of theory timing or any academics or any method of teaching. So, as people know, because it's already documented in my biography, that I learned my timing and my music from an Italian ballroom teacher. Her name is June Liberta, who passed away many years ago. So she was the one that inspired me to learn about how to apply the music and the theory to the mambo dancing that we did, because back in those days we called it mambo. And she told me that this would help me as a teacher, as a choreographer, and it would help me to spread and teach people around the world, which is true. So I would say that one of the things I remember that helped me a lot First of all, it's the music. The music,
You love it.
yes, the music. I grew up with this music in my house. My parents played it, and I lived in New York all my life. And in New York, we always had great music, especially back in those days. We had live music,
Yeah,
live music.
that's
I
what
mean,
I'm missing this year.
yeah,
So lots.
you don't see too many orchestras now playing, not even in New York. So I miss that a lot because I grew up in a time where you had live bands everywhere in New York. Sometimes in one night you might have 10 bands playing in different
That's
locations,
amazing.
and you can dance to great orchestras starting with Tito Puente, Eddie
Yeah.
Palmieri, Pacheco, Joe Cuba. You would go to clubs and actually dance to their live music, which was wonderful. So I grew up in a very fortunate time, I would say, because these days you rarely hear live music in New York, very rare. And so I fell in love with this music, and I also found that the music helped me to release stresses. Because New York City,
Yeah.
we have stress. We
It's
live in stress,
tension
and
filled.
we have a lot of. I grew up in a family that had a lot of problems, so when I would feel emotionally stressed with family problems, I would go to the clubs and I would dance. And I realized that this music was like therapy for me. Because after I dance at a club for 4 or 5 hours, I would come out of the club feeling so much better. And I realized very young that this music was going to help me deal with the problems of life. So for me, it was always enjoying the music for the music and enjoying it because it helped me release the stresses that I live with. So that's what made me really love this music. And of course, the beginning of my dancing started with what we call a puppy love heartbreak. And I don't want to take time to go over that whole story, but it's
Yeah.
in my bio. And it was a story that started with me wanting to go out with this girl. I was 13 years old, and so I didn't know how to dance. So she left me for somebody who could dance. To make a long story short, and that's what turned me around. I became determined to learn how to dance, so I would never find myself in that situation again.
Again.
So that's how I started, and I think it was all meant to happen for me because um, my whole life, it seems like my career, my meeting, and working with Tito Puente, I don't think it has been a coincidence. I truly believe that this is my calling and my mission in life. And I've been doing it now 50 years, and I've had a wonderful, long career. And I have great memories of all the places I've traveled, the shows I've done with Tito Puente, with all these orchestras. I've had a chance to really, really dance and work with some of the greatest musicians and the greatest orchestras. So my career for me has been a real, real blessing. I really have to say that the only way to describe that is I've had a very amazing, amazing dance career now for 50 years. But again, it starts with loving the music. And
Yes.
it's funny because growing up in New York City, my parents are from Puerto Rico. And growing up in New York City, I realized that Puerto Ricans, New York Puerto Ricans, they didn't speak too much Spanish back in the day. What made me interested in learning Spanish was when I started getting interested in the music, and I wanted to know what the singers were
What's
saying.
the song about?
So that's what caught my attention, and I started to learn more about Spanish. Thank you very much.
Vanessa joining us.